Hey everyone, Percy Jules here. So today we're going to talk about ADSR. Now ADSR is an acronym that's being thrown around all the time in music production, especially in the context of sound design, and it might benefit you to at least know what it means. So let's talk about it.
Supercy.
Alright, now any sound over time goes through several phases, so from its inception until it dies down. Now ADSR refers to 4 different phases that any sound goes through. And by the way, when we're talking about ADSR, usually it refers to amplitude or volume changes. Now theoretically it could also refer to other parameters, but again, when we're talking about ADSR, usually it refers to amplitude. Okay, now let's take a look at this graphic. So what it represents is what in music production is called an envelope. So it's basically a visual presentation of the phases a sound goes through. Now, by the way, this is not a generic envelope. This is specific to a certain sound, but it shows all the phases and it serves as a good example. So the x-axis, so left to right, that represents time. The y-axis, so up or down, that represents, the intensity of the parameter in question. So in many cases, that would be volume. So by using this envelope, let's go over the 4 phases that the acronym ADSR refers to. Alright, the first phase. Now what happens in the first phase is that the volume goes from 0 up to what usually is referred to as the peak volume. So if you can imagine, for example, if you pluck a string on a guitar, or if you press a key on a keyboard or a piano or something like that, what happens is that the air is already being set in motion. It starts to vibrate, which eventually causes sound to occur. But it kind of needs a little time to settle into its natural state, so to speak. And this is kind of the run up to that. And this phase is what we call the attack. Alright, next phase. So the sound has gone up from 0 to peak volume, but at some point, as I mentioned, it's going to settle down to its natural state and its natural volume. So this settling down, so to speak, is the next phase, and that is what we call the decay. So, third phase. So we've had the attack, we've had the decay, and both of them together are actually the run-up to the natural state of the sound and the natural volume of the sound. Now, the next phase is the natural state of the sound, so to speak. And this phase is what we call the sustain. Finally, the fourth phase. Now, the fourth phase probably best described by the example of releasing your finger from a key of a keyboard. So whenever you press a key on a keyboard, the first 3 phases will occur. So attack, decay, sustain. Whenever you release your finger from a keyboard, obviously the sound will go from natural volume back to 0, so it will kind of fade away. And that fading away is the last phase, the fourth phase, and that is what we call the release. Alright, now let's quickly go over a few examples to clarify a little bit. What we have here is a synthesizer. Now, let's keep our eye on this part right here. So this is an envelope, and as you can see, specifically an amplitude envelope. Now I've set this synthesizer up so that whenever I press a key on the keyboard, it produces just a sine wave. Okay, now there are a few things to note about this sound. So first of all, it is pretty snappy. So it kind of takes very little time to reach peak volume. And we can confirm that by looking at the so the attack settings, and it is set to 0s. Actually, it's set to 0 milliseconds, which means that virtually whenever you press a key, it's going to shoot up to peak volume instantaneously. So, and that's what makes it so snappy. Now, another thing to note about this sound is as long as I keep my finger on not the trigger, I was going to say trigger. Okay, as long as I keep my finger on the key, there virtually are no fluctuations in volume. it's kind of staying the same all the time until I release my finger. Then the volume, fades away. But as long as I keep my finger there, there are no fluctuations. And we can also confirm that by looking at the S, so the sustain settings. And as you can see, it is set to maximum, which means that, the attack occurs, the volume goes to peak volume. But as the sustain settings are also set to maximum, no matter how I set the decay, it's going to stay the same until I release my finger. Okay, now let's make a few changes, and let's start with the attack settings, and let's see what that does to the sound. So again, it's pretty snappy. But now let's bring up the attack, and let's see what that does. So it's pretty obvious that now the sound needs a little bit more time to reach peak volume. So the attack now has become much more a gradual thing. Okay, now let's try something else. Let's bring down the sustain quite a bit. And let's bring up the decay a little bit. And let's see what this does. So it's still very snappy because of the attack. The attack is set to 0 again. But then it pretty quickly dies down or quiets down to a much lower level. And that has a dramatic influence on the sound. All right, now finally, let's go back to the original settings. So like this. But now let's bring up the release quite a bit. Okay, let's see what this does. And especially pay attention to what happens when I release my finger from the key. Let's go. So it's pretty obvious that whenever I release my finger, the sound still kind of lingers on. It's still fading away, but it takes a lot longer to reach the 0 point. So I hope these examples help clarify a bit what ADSR actually is, what you can do with it, and why it is so extremely important in especially sound design. Okay? Anyway, that's basically it for today. Thanks for watching. Again, hope it helps. Talk to you soon.